Hello everyone, welcome to my fourth video on Make It Stick, my Make It Stick book report. This video will be less about a review of the things I learned in the book and more about a practical application of these things as they pertain to basketball coaching. Only basketball coaching. I'm going to talk about a bunch of things. I'll probably miss some things that I wanted to talk about and then end up having to correct myself throughout the course of the video, but let's just get started. Let's just fire. So one of the first things we learned was retrieval practice is more important than review. This happens very naturally in basketball. You can't, usually practice does not involve, just sitting around talking about what you might do if this happens in a game. Usually it's very hands-on. Almost always it's very hands-on. One caveat I'd say to that is, if you as a coach need to explicitly say something while they do the rep for them to do it right, then they're not engaging in, retrieval practice. Like effective retrieval practice would look like having them go out, play 5-on-5 and see if they can do it. And that's the test. That's the retrieval. See if they can retrieve that information. And if they don't, then, back to the drawing board. Spacing is, we talked about retrieval, spacing, interleaving, spacing. Again, natural because you have practice usually every day. But how can we make spacing happen by practice segment, almost, where we can, instead of, let's say, I want to work on shooting, instead of, okay, well, we're just going to work on shooting for 45 minutes in this block, and then we're going to move on. Instead, it's like, how can we work on spacing or shooting for 10 minutes and maybe interleave another subject within that? Or maybe we'll work on shooting for 15 minutes, just shooting, and then we'll do another drill. And then we'll do another drill where shooting's involved, but we're also interleaving another skill. And then over the course of the practice, you space out shooting reps so they get, they get to forget what it felt good. Instead of just blocking it, like 45 minutes of shooting, right? You can space it out through a practice segment. Interleaving, right? I just kind of talked about that, is mixing in different but relevant tasks, right? So maybe we do 15 minutes of spot up shooting, but then the next rep is going to be a transition drill where we're working on our transition, but the shot we're getting out of it is 3-pointers. So we're interleaving different skills within each other, and it's building on each other. And this is, I want to talk about this. This is very interesting. The idea that knowledge is cumulative, right? Knowledge is cumulative. The more you know, the more you can know. So applying this, right? We want to make sure players have a very fundamental understanding of one thing. And once they understand that one thing, then they can build out of it and understand. For example, we teach, let's say, like, ball pressure is really important, right? Ball pressure. And let's say we got that down as our point. Now, understanding that ball pressure is really important, and the fact that you pressure the ball, you're going to get people to drive by you because you're pressuring the ball so hard. A perfect skill to interleave with that would be our help defense, coming to the wall, right? Defending the rim. Because logically, we can build off the knowledge that, okay, if we're going to pressure the ball, naturally what's going to happen next is people might get to the rim, so this is why we need help defense. This is where you interleave skills, right? You work on pressuring the ball, and then next you work on pressuring the ball with the wall coming in. So now we're working on two different skills, right? But they build on each other, and the knowledge of one helps the other. So that's very interesting. This has to do with a mental model. A mental model is kind of the word that I would say for being able to accumulate knowledge and how it kind of all stacks up upon each other. And then you have this, experts have a very rich and complex mental model of how the game would work. They would involve all 5 players and how all these rotations would go, and how it would depend on different scenarios and different players. It gets, the more experienced, the more well-versed, the more complex the mental model can be. Okay. Cool. So we talked about growth mindset and how encouraging failure is very important. I think it's very important to have a safe learning environment, and you can do this. Maybe something tangible would be, let's say I'm coaching, second grade, first grade, and they really don't know how to dribble a basketball very well. Maybe second or third grade, let's say that. And what I can do is I can say our goal is dribble the basketball so hard that you lose it, right? I want to see basketballs flying all around the gym, and if that happens, then we achieved our goal, right? That's maybe one phrase that you would use at the youth level to encourage failure, encourage going so hard that you mess up. Interesting. So we talked about interference and how everybody wants easy learning, everybody wants preferential learning. And nobody wants interferences in their learning process. But we talked about how interference can be a good thing with our study of the one-side phone call versus the two sides, and our study of blurred text that's slightly out of focus. Here's an example I thought of for maybe a good interference would be a slippery floor. So a slippery floor in a basketball gym, every player is going to hate that. I mean, you can't make the moves you want to make. You can't move at the speed you move at. But let's think about this. Maybe this is a good interference because now, offensively, defensively, you've basically made the game slow down because people can't make the same cuts. So now players are forced to maybe play the game a little bit more methodically. This interference, this annoying thing, might actually produce outcomes, beneficial outcomes, and help players work on a facet of their game that they never would be able to had the floor not been so slippery. That's just an example of a good interference. Maybe. Depends, right? Everything, it depends. Delayed feedback. There's a study, or just general like scientific knowledge. Delayed feedback is ideal for motor learning. Anything that involves physical body function or anything motor learning, you want to delay the feedback. So if somebody shoots a shot, right, one shot, and you're immediately like telling them like, hey, this is how you gotta, they shoot the shot. Oh, get your elbow. Oh, do this, right? That's not as effective as having them go through the workout, right? Maybe they spend 10 minutes on it. And then during a water break, you go, how do you feel about that? You go up to them and then make that, idea. You pose that question. And now there's been some time. This is my theory. I actually didn't go into detail, but my theory is that now there's some time for some encoding to actually happen in your brain to actually process the motor learning that just took place. So now there's actually a frame of reference. There's actually some space for you to provide some feedback that's actually effective instead of in the moment motor learning feedback, which is less effective. Cool. Let's talk about the big lie technique that we see in politics. The more information gets used, spread around, exposed, the more likely we are to take it for truth, or even maybe falsely remember that it is true and there's statistics or something to back it up. Here's a good one of the example of the big lie technique / effect. Defense wins championships. We hear it over and over and over and over again as coaches that to a certain point, I feel like more than half of basketball coaches could probably be prompted to falsely remember that this is a statistic, that the best defensive teams are the ones that win, that are the most winning. Stats prove just the opposite, that the best teams, the teams that win championships, are most often the most elite offensive teams and passable defensive teams within their elite space. This is just the truth. Defense doesn't win championships, point differential wins championships. And if anything, offense wins championships, if anything, right? So that's an example of the big lie because it's been said so often, probably had good intentions behind it, trying to promote hard work and, toughness, because defense is associated with toughness and hard work and stuff. But that's just the truth. That's an example of the big lie technique. We've all heard that. Elaboration. Okay, this is a technique that I use all the time. I love using elaboration. I love posing questions. Same as generation. We'll talk about generation later. Elaboration, more so the idea of them putting in their own meaning, is something that I love to do. So For example, we'll use our ball pressure, right? And we call this the wolf, right? The person guarding the ball, they're supposed to wolf them down. They're supposed to, their role is the wolf, right? So I might be in the huddle, right, after shortly introducing it, right? Instead of just calling it the wolf, expecting to get the knowledge, or maybe even explaining why we call it the wolf, I might go, Johnny, why do we call the person guarding the ball a wolf? And they might not know the answer. Maybe I didn't give them the cues, and that would get more towards generation. But now they're having to put a concept in their own words. Like, they're literally having to explain it using their own words. They might say something like, because a wolf hunts from behind, because maybe they heard that one. And I might say, okay, great. And they recited that, so that's retrieval practice. But what's another reason? And now they have to come up with some kind of reason why it might be a wolf. Or maybe they, elaboration. They're putting it in their own words. Or maybe I say, Johnny, teach Sam how to do, how to be a great wolf. What is it? Tell him what it means. And you know what I mean? He's engaging in elaboration. Okay. That wasn't my best work there. False consensus. Interesting. So I would love to give an example. I could imagine this happening between a head coach and their staff, thinking about the game. And let's say a team gets absolutely scorched in transition defense. The team's just running laps out of the gym, getting open shots after open shots by pushing the pace. And the head coach is watching that game, and he's just like, well, that's the most obvious solution I've ever heard. Obviously we're losing this game because we're not getting back on defense, right? And he's so sure that this is his perspective is the correct, and everybody would agree on it. And he just goes to his coaching staff and begins talking about how can we help them. So he goes to the coaching staff, how can we get back on defense, right? Because he's engaging in this false consensus effect, right? He believes that already, clear as day, it must be because we're not getting back on defense. And then the assistant coach goes and they say, well, I don't think getting back on defense is the problem. I think we need to put more pressure on the basketball and offensively rebound harder so that they have somebody guarding them initially, or that they have to put more people back instead of being able to run out of transition. So, and then the head coach is shocked to this because he didn't even think about this. He was sure that everybody would be seeing the game the same way he did. Awesome. Rule versus example learning. This can also the terminology I actually like is actually principle versus rule, which is confusing because in this example, oh my gosh, so many different words are being used for different things right now. In this phrasing, this language that the book uses, rule is used as two different things, right? In this. So anyway, we're just gonna say rule versus example because that's what the book says. So a rule is a general principle. A rule is a principle, an idea that you can apply to multiple things. Example is, in this situation you do blank, right? And it's rule learners, principle-based learners are much more effective learners, and they succeed a lot more in more complex, higher order tasks. So how can we teach principles instead of examples? When this happens, you do this, right? For example, let's say in spacing, okay? So instead of saying, okay, if the ball handler drives down the middle from the wing and you're in the corner, you lift up. And when a ball handler drives from the baseline and you're at the wing, you cut every time. That's an example, case by case. And then if you do it like that, you have to learn how to do that. This case, versus a rule, versus a principle. Here's a principle. At all times, we want to remain available to the ball handler, or at least one pass away, or at least two passes away, never more than three. And we want to never allow one defender to guard two. Those are principles of spacing that you can apply to every scenario. So now all you have to remember is don't let one defender guard both of us. How can we figure this out? Be available to the ball, number 2. And now you have those two things, and now you can just apply them in every scenario. So that's a principle versus an example, right? Okay, cool. Dunning-Kruger effect. I'll use my exit for an example. I'll say my first year as a coach. I've been a basketball player, and I had a lot of winningness. I had a lot of success. It's very high self-efficacy in my basketball knowledge and ability, as well as my ability to coach it. I felt very confident in my ability to coach it. I've always felt articulate, and I always felt like, I could get them going, right? Very overconfident my first year as a coach, and my understanding of what it meant to really coach and what really moves the needle was really nothing, because Dunning-Kruger effect, I was at a very low level of skill and ability and work. So it's the least competent people that tend to be the most overconfident in their abilities. And now, as I've grown as a coach, I still have a very high level of self-efficacy, but I see now how much work there is to be done. I see how far the road ahead of me is, and I have a frame of reference to what really makes a good coach. Cool. Curse of knowledge, right? Curse of knowledge is an NBA player teaching a bunch of second graders how to play basketball. It will be terrible. They will have no clue where to even start. They will say all the wrong things. I mean, imagine an NBA player teaching a second grader how to shoot. Oh, you got to shoot with form. Dude, they're in second grade. They can't even get the ball to the hoop. Like, that is not right. They don't know what they're talking about. Cool. Generation. Love this one. And I talked about it a little bit when I said elaboration, because they go hand in hand. They kind of do. But generation, this is a motor skill learning applied. So here's an example. So generation is giving them a problem before you give them the solution, giving them a question before you give them the answer, right? Having them generate their own answer. Here's an example. So say I want my basketball players to be better at handling pressure. Here's what I do. I have one ball handler and I have two defenders, so they're constantly getting double teamed. Now get all the way up the court, right? That's a problem. I'm having them go solve it. I'm not giving them solution, right? As opposed to saying, hey guys, we're going to go through this dribble drill and we're going to work on our retreat dribbles, because this is what you're going to have to do when you get pressured. And then I have them go get pressured. Maybe they'll do their retreat, but it's just not going to be as meaningful. It's not going to be as applied versus you just throw them to the wolves. One ball handler, two defenders, they get ripped, they get frustrated, and then you teach them solutions. Then you teach them the retreat dribble, and then they're like, oh, wow, this is like really helpful, and it's meaningful to them because now they feel like it matters more. They feel like it matters more because they just got their asses kicked. Cool, let me just look through some notes and see if I see anything that I really resonate with and I'd like to apply on the spot. Something interesting I saw near the end of the book was a company, a corporation that had its employees taught other employees, and it was mutual too. So that everybody was teaching each other, so that everybody was an expert. Anyway, I just had a thought. Imagine a program where the varsity players conduct a freshman practice to see if they can teach cultural cornerstones of the program. I think that'd be very interesting. I think this is relevant to coaching. And this is an example of writer's block. And what he does is he just, every time he has bad writer's block, he writes a letter to his mom. And about how upset he is that he can't figure out the right words to say and the problems that he's facing. And then he reads the draft and he deletes all the sobbing and the stuff to his mother and keeps everything he wrote about how frustrating the experience was. Everything else he just keeps. And now he has a draft. And now he has something to build off of, versus if you never have something to build off of, there's nowhere to go. 0 times 0 is 0. 0.1 0 times 1 is 0. 0. 0 times, 1 is 0. 0. Dude, I'm actually done. We're gonna throw that in the garbage. Very interesting. I want to make an effort to get players invested and interested in the learning process, right? Not just teaching them skills, but teaching them how to learn skills. so that then they can be take control of their own learning journey. Cool. This was a funny quote. I mean, this is really important. Oh my gosh, I didn't talk about flying in azimuth. But, we talked about these illusions, and so often perception is not reality. And as basketball coaches, we become the pilot that we talked about in the other episode that had believed his own perceptions of what was going on over his objective gauges in his room, or didn't even pay attention to his objective gauges. And they were in a full speed descent down to earth, and they could have died until they finally got through the clouds and were able to see clearly, and they were able to see objectively, holy shit, we're falling 1,000 feet, a second down to right F. So, as basketball coaches, we want to measure everything. We want to define our victories, and we want to just put up those objective gauges, like the pilots they have in the pilot's cockpit. So what's our instruments in our pilot's cockpit as coaches? How can we make sure that we're flying in azimuth and we're staying on the right track and we're not falling 1,000 feet down the sky and not worried about something else? Cool. Cool. Oh, interesting. Language fluency is very important for the ability to learn, and language is going to be. I mean, you can tell already. Like, I think language is so powerful. In creating new language for the things that you're trying to say. Like, instead of saying ball pressure, wolf, right? Because that carries a new meaning, and your ability to understand language. And the more we teach language and prioritize language, the better they're going to be able to learn things. I think that's really important. Yeah, I think I think I touched on everything that moves the needle. Awesome. Thank you for watching.